Zac Bissonnette, the name of your book is Good Advice from Bad People. Why do I want to take any kind of advice from bad people?
Yeah, so the idea of the book was to show kind of their downfall was generally related to not following their own advice. So we'll get into the examples to see it. But, so the idea was you have this sort of self-help quote, and then the life of the person who gave it is sort of a case study in what happens if you don't follow it.
All right, well, there's some great quotes, especially about financial figures in the book. Let's start with the first one. This is Dick Fuld, the former CEO of Lehman Brothers on Risk. He said, when you know what you are talking about, others will follow you because it's safe to follow you. It's pretty funny in retrospect.
It sure is. I mean, he led that company into the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history. And what was interesting about that was he said that in a commencement speech at the University of Colorado, Boulder, his alma mater, about 2.5 years before the collapse of Lehman Brothers. And, I was researching this. If the CEO of a company you own stock in goes back to his alma mater to do a commencement speech, it's about as good of a contrarian indicator as you'll find. I mean, it just seems like that's often the sort of peak of the market, and then that reversion to the mean happens right after. I mean, it's
that's an interesting indicator.
It's really kind of interesting.
That.
Ron Johnson did the same thing right before he drove J.C. Penney into a ditch. I mean, these guys, it's just time after time after time. They go to their alma mater and then they ruin their career.
I'm going to watch for that. Full disclosure, I used to work for Lehman Brothers. Let's get to the next quote. It's from John Sculley on dissent, and he used to be the CEO of Apple. He fired Steve Jobs. He says, dissent stimulates discussion, prompting others to make more perceptive observations. Once again, pretty classic in retrospect.
Yeah, I mean, John Sculley ended up in a boardroom battle with Steve Jobs, who said that Scully was bad for Apple, and instead of sort of using that dissent to kind of stimulate discussion, Scully went to the board and had Steve Jobs fired. A couple years later, John Sculley was fired for poor performance, and then 4 years after that, I think, Steve Jobs came back, and we know what happened next, the greatest turnaround in history, and John Sculley has not been heard from since.
You know who's been heard from since he went to jail? Bernard Madoff.
That is
true.
The
final quote. This is what he said after he was in jail, in prison. The best chance for the average investor is to put money in an index fund.
I like this tip because, you got to hand it to him. Bernie's got something here. I mean, for the average investor, index funds are the way to go. And that if Bernie Madoff were to somehow magically become the person who convinces people to follow that advice, he'd have done some good.
He is certainly a bad person.
He sure is.
Pretty good advice, though. Good book, too. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for watching The Street.